From the Hype HQ studio in Chicago, Illinois, it's Startup Hypeman, the podcast, Season 12. Hello, everybody. My name is Raj Nation, and I am the founder of Startup Hypeman. I help startups stand apart from their competition and stand out to their audience with storytelling, messaging, and pitches that perform. In this podcast, you'll hear my conversations with startup leaders from around the globe as they share a slice of their company's story. Stories on growth, scale, successes, and failures, all to help you and your company grow up and ultimately stand out. Before we begin today's episode, I'd like to invite you to join the email newsletter that doesn't suck. That's right, if you head to startuphypeman.com and enter your email address, first you'll get my free SaaS masterclass, but you'll also get updates whenever we release new episodes, plus my storytelling tips and advice periodically throughout the month, and helpful resources from Startup Hypeman partners. It's the newsletter that doesn't suck, available at startuphypeman.com. All right, speaking of things that don't suck, let's begin today's episode of Startup Hypeman, the podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, making his way to the microphone from Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and currently residing in Chicago, Illinois, he is the co-founder and CEO of FanFood. Please welcome Carson Goodale.
That was amazing. I've never been more excited for a podcast.
Well, it's my job as the hype man to hype you up. He is Carson Goodale, the co-founder and CEO of FanFood, as I just said. What is FanFood? Well, hey, interestingly enough, FanFood's a company I've worked a lot with over the last 3 years, helping with their messaging, their pitch, etc. So the FanFood pitch, do you want me to give it or do you want to give it?
I'm giving it, Raj. Let me tell you, as a diehard sports fan, there is nothing more frustrating than missing a big play because you were stuck waiting in a line for a hot dog and beer. FanFood keeps fans in the moment. Our mobile ordering app allows fans to order concessions directly from their seat and get notified when it's ready for pickup. And we even deliver it directly to your seat in some venues. Our app is live on the Android and iOS store. And this week, we just released our web app. So now fans don't need to download an app to have a seamless ordering experience.
I couldn't have said it better myself, Carson. So FanFood has grown a lot over the last few years. We first got to know each other in, I think, early 2017.
May 2017.
Yeah, 2017, April or May. Now, over that time, FanFood has grown. You're now in 75 venues. You've raised $3.5 million. You've got 25 employees. Some of your customers include University of North Carolina, Tennessee, the Durham Bulls, the Formula One Circuit of the Americas in Austin, Texas. This is a company that's on the rise. It's been cool to see your growth, be part of the growth along the journey. Today, we are talking about the concept of bottom-up customer acquisition. Now, can you just give our listeners a little abstract on why that is on your mind or why that's relevant to FanFood?
Yeah, so when you think of FanFood in sports, your mind immediately goes to the professional venues of the world. We're here in Chicago, so you think Wrigley Field, Soldier Field, where the Bears play, big game this weekend. United Center, where the Bulls and Blackhawks play. That's where you kind of think. And so as we think about our bottom-up strategy, we're thinking of how can we get FanFood into high schools, youth sports complex, minor league teams, arenas, and things like that.
Yeah, and we're going to dive all into that. Before we do, let's take a little trip down memory lane or get to know Carson a little bit better. Now, Carson, you're building a tech company right now. Your dad is actually an accomplished technology executive in his career. Has technology always just been in your blood? Is it something that was newer in your life? What's that like?
Yeah, I definitely get the entrepreneurial bug from my dad. He was the tech guy. I, on the other hand, I have zero technology skills. If you asked me to code something, I would, it would probably ruin the company. So it's in the best interest of FanFood not to get me behind a keyboard and code. But no, I definitely got a lot of help from my dad in the early days. That's how we kind of, my dad, integral piece in helping getting our MVP off the ground and running and, helping build kind of that foundation of what FanFood is today.
Speaking of your dad, when we think about how FanFood got started, there's kind of a story there, maybe not necessarily how directly FanFood got started, but when you think back to maybe the seedlings of this whole thing, can you talk us through sort of that journey and then how that ultimately led to FanFood?
Well, yeah, I think like, so my like moment that I can remember. So why FanFood exists, because we are very like, I mean, part of our mission, right, is to deliver the ultimate fan experience. I think technology is making it easier for fans to stay at home. And we're in this economy now where experience does drive everything. Like fans don't necessarily go to their favorite team to watch their favorite team play, rather for that experience. And, something that FanFood is really trying to hone in on is, making, staying in that moment and enjoying every second of the action. And so I remember, I think back when my dad was at the University of Iowa game, it was in 8th grade, snowing out, miserable. My dad would make me go stand in long lines. And I remember my dad gave me $20. I missed a touchdown play. But on the same time, Iowa ended up winning a field goal in the last second. We decided to stay. We were this close to leaving, but we decided to stay. Was not waiting in the line, but I do remember that moment, right? That like split second moment of the ball going through the uprights. It's a moment I'll never forget with my dad. I didn't get to like share a lot of memories with my dad growing up because he was an entrepreneur. He was always working hard. And so when I did get to experience those are, things that I'll always forget. So that's why FanFood, does exist, is to keep, maximize most of those moments.
Yeah. It's like that, it's like that photograph in your memory that never goes away. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Very impactful.
So let's come to today's topic, which is this idea of bottom-up customer acquisition. Now, you affronted this really well by saying, hey, when most people think of FanFood, if you think of concession food, you think of stadiums, you immediately jump to the pros. You think NFL, you think NHL, NBA, MLB, et cetera. And then you probably start salivating at all the possibilities of like, oh my gosh, we could have the Bulls, the Golden State Warriors, the Cubs, the Yankees, and all of those are big name teams, more than anything, big name brands. Was that FanFood's initial mindset when you got this going?
Duh. Yes, absolutely. And I'll also be the first to say, if I had $1 for every time someone came up to me and said, oh, I've thought of that idea, like we would have.
You'd have all your money raised.
Yeah, I wouldn't need to go fundraising all the time. We would, So, but yeah, I mean, and if you think about it in the lens of like, I think most startups, building credibility, establishing a credibility is tough as a startup, right? So when you're taking a product to the cream of the crop, the enterprise, the big leagues, what credibility do you have? I mean, it's just like raising, it's just like sales. It's just like raising money. It's, establishing credibility and building traction. And what we learned was that there was probably 10 other mobile ordering app companies that tried to go pitch the similar idea. So what we had to do was kind of reevaluate, hey, we got to swallow our pride. Yes, we want to be in there, but it's probably in our best interest to scale and maybe in these other markets where no one maybe, is selling, build out our product, build out our user acquisition strategy, build out, if we're going to fail, we might as well, would you rather fail in the bottom up or at a top down? When you get the top down, you only get one opportunity. And if you mess it up, that could be it. Right. So from a risk mitigation perspective, and building the traction and building a business and learning and iterating on what you're learning is why, we're taking the bottom up approach.
Okay, so that's an interesting point. You talk about risk mitigation. That's not really the lens I had thought of it through before, but that's a really important factor, especially when you consider like pitching investors. One of the big things they want to see is how are you going to mitigate risk with this whole, if we're going to put money in you, how do you make it not risky? So when you think about that initial mindset of, oh my gosh, we could get all these big stadiums and everything, and then you make that transition into, well, we should go down market, we should go bottom up. What we think, in your case, high schools and colleges and maybe the minor leagues or semi-pros. Was it, I guess, did you have experience where you were like, hey, we're getting pushed around by the majors? Or was it before you even got to that point? Then you're like, let's rethink.
Yeah, no, we learned quickly that the sales cycle is going to be long. There were some things from a technology perspective that we didn't have in our platform that it was communicated that we needed to get to that level. So there was definitely some things from a technology perspective that we still had to build out that we didn't have the money for, but we still did like have a awesome technology platform. We had a native solution, and we could bring that native solution into these markets where no one really had a solution for it. So we could start to build a business, start generating revenue, start adding customers to FanFood's portfolio, and then, build up. Meanwhile, now we have the traction, and we can go and get, fundraising to say, hey, we built this business here. Now let's use that money, keep investing in the technology, and work our way up. And that's kind of the approach.
You talked about the sales process was lengthy and depth, and especially, you think about like Major League Baseball. They have people may not know this, they have a whole wing called like Major League Baseball Advanced Media, where like if you're going to work with a team, it's got to go through the league. You can't just one-off do something with the Cincinnati Reds. The entire league has to approve it, and that could take years potentially. So when you shift down market, the answer then logically becomes, okay, who are the people who don't have these restrictions and probably are fine with some technological limitations or haven't thought through all the other integrations something you might need? And that's where this high school idea comes in, as well as minors and some of the colleges and semi-pros. So tell me about the shift in the sales process then. What's different in selling to the bottom up field, let's say?
Value proposition is still very similar, right? What we do is like, we want to take pressure off your concession lines. We want to increase your F&B per cap on a per concession stand basis. We want to provide the best in-venue fan experience possible and allow your fans to stay seated in order from their seat, pick it up through an express pickup line. Doesn't require much labor to execute this. And it's just bringing, convenience and on-demand convenience into an industry that is, a little bit legacy. And I don't know. I think that we did that because, like I said, there was a market. There's a market. There's a need for it, right? So
the value prop, I think, is very much the same on the consumer side, like the fan side. What I think is interesting, and this is something that we had to work closely on together, was how does it change on that quote unquote stadium side, especially when you think about when you're selling to, it's one thing to talk to the head of marketing operations for the White Sox. It's another thing to talk to an athletic director at, I don't know, Wheaton Warrenville South High School.
Yeah. There's definitely, the bigger the opportunity, the more decision makers. In our case, in the food service space, professional venues oftentimes will contract concessions out to a third party like an Aramark or a Levy, who manage and run the concession operations. And so, there's multiple angles to attack. And this is when you start to get into like B2B enterprise sales. You might have to get the approval from multiple people to get to that, close one stage. In the bottom up approach, your persona might also be your decision maker, might be your buyer, might be your champion, right? Might be one point of contact. And so from a sales cycle perspective, it enables you to speed it up. So, at FanFood too, at our stage, we do have a direct sales team, but I am also a big believer in like inbound marketing as well, and really getting them to come to you and spending your time working with, opportunities that are at the bottom of the funnel that are already kind of educated in your product offering also streamlines, that buying process.
I want to ask you more about that sales and marketing relationship, but before I do, I just want to let our listeners know about a new partner of the show, Sales Hacker. If you are a longtime listener here, then you know that I try to feature more B2B startups on this show, or like in FanFood's case, startups that might be marketplace but have a very strong B2B side to them. And Sales Hacker is the world's smartest community for forward-thinking B2B professionals. They have 135,000 members. And whether you're a CEO, a head of sales, or a sales rep, Sales Hacker helps you get better at your job with podcasts, articles, webinars, and research from actual sales experts and practitioners, including yours truly. No big deal. It's no fluff from outside content marketers, just the straight dope to grow your sales acumen. I love what they're doing over there, and I'm so excited to have them as a partner of this podcast now. You can join the Sales Hacker community for free at saleshacker.com. Again, that's saleshacker.com. Just join the Sales Hacker community for free to get access to all those articles, research, and more. One more time, www.saleshacker.com. All right, so we're talking here with Carson Goodale, the co-founder and CEO of FanFood. Carson, you mentioned how you're a big believer in inbound. So there's the direct outbound selling side, and then there's inbound where they're more educated and more or less closer to a purchase decision. What types of inbound marketing activities is FanFood doing to drum up sales?
Yeah, so I think like we identify those key value propositions. Like, why are our personas buying FanFood? What's in it for them? And our kind of step one is identifying those value propositions and correlating or tying those to a problem. Like each value proposition is solving a unique problem. There is a reason why they're buying. We create content and solutions around those problems that are also kind of correlated to our value propositions in the form of blogs, in the form of, we have a game day podcast where we interview industry experts in the world of sports, asking them about what are they doing to optimize or make their stadiums more efficient, what's the latest and greatest sports technologies in the space, what are some kind of key trends as it pertains to fan experience, regular email, and just kind of like building those, and then people will start to, subscribe, and, you start to build your list and stuff that way. And then when you start pushing out some of this content, and then when it gets really fun, you can start doing retargets, right? And creating lookalikes, and then you can start to, get involved in some of the in some of the paid. And once you get, your cost per lead figured out and you get the conversion funnels going, and then it's just a scaling game. You figure out however many leads you need to generate a close one, and then you scale that up, and then it's a scaling game, and that's when things get really fun. And I hope to get there in quarter one.
So tell me then, so I know the Game Day podcast is something that you guys are really proud of and enjoy, and you guys are pumping out episodes, I think, every week of that. And you've had some pretty cool guests on the show, like director of marketing for the Baltimore Ravens, like some pretty high profile people. Is the intent, when you think about inbound for the podcast, is the intent to start to attract some of those upmarket companies, or is it to show the down market, the high schools, the colleges, the semi-pros, we are forward thinking thought leaders because we're talking to actually the best in the game at this? Or is it both?
It is both a little bit, right? We know where we want to go. We know where we're scaling today, but we know where we want to go. My business partner, a couple people on our team, just got back from the winter meetings, minor league baseball trade show. And a big thing that they heard was, "Oh, don't you guys have a podcast? Oh, I get your emails every week."
That's awesome.
And then, "Oh, you guys are you're the FanFood guys." It took a little bit, but now, we go back to why we took a bottom-up approach in the first place. And one of the big reasons, like I said, was building credibility, establishing credibility as a startup, early stage startup. And so you start to get feedback like that, that's kind of validation because it's tough to measure, right? How do you measure credibility? Number of touch points, number of impressions, I don't know. It gets to a point where they're like, okay, these people know what the hell they're talking about, and they're doing it, and they're bringing in smarter people like, the CEO of minor league baseball. We had him on, like, it was an amazing, podcast, expert in fan experience. This guy knows fan experience. He knows fan experience better than anyone. And now it's an opportunity for not only us to like learn, but like everyone. And then, and then that perception of like, yeah, we know what we're talking about because we're doing it every day, and they're starting to tie that to us.
And I think part of this equation too is when you think about credibility, it takes, not anyone is getting meetings with the CEO of minor league baseball. So there's even this added like social proof to it. Like, wow, like they're in conversations with these kinds of people. They must, even if they're just the ones interviewing them, they must know what they're talking about if they're having conversations with big names like that.
Exactly.
The other part of this too that I think is so interesting is you almost, when you take that bottom up approach, you start to slowly nudge for like the ceiling slowly lifts, right? And you start to nudge further and further against like first the fringe level of the professionals to a point where you kind of become unavoidable. And ideally we're going to get to a point very soon where fans are going to professional games and being like, what the hell? My high school stadium has this. Why don't you have it?
Yeah, and that's kind of intentional, right? Like we kind of want to be that little bug almost. Like we want to get to someone told me, I can't remember who, this concept of like, are you a mosquito? Is it a mosquito bite or a shark bite? Like shark bite is like, I need to buy that, mosquito bite's like, oh, cool. But like, well, if you have enough mosquitoes, inside your venue bugging you, there's, that turns into a shark bite pretty quick, So, I think it's definitely intentional. That's, I think, intentional, or maybe one of the added value benefits of, taking the bottom up approach. It's not as glamorous. It's a lot more gritty. It's, harder work, and because you have to get the volume, right? And so that we hope, right? Because today's FanFood users at a high school are tomorrow's users at a college, and tomorrow's college users that go to sporting events, or the season ticket holders at college events, go to all the pro events. And so like high schools go to youth sports, so it's, that's kind of the hope. We'll kind of wait and see and continue to take this bottom up approach, and we'll see how the user retention unfolds.
We're talking with Carson Goodale, the co-founder and CEO of FanFood, today on Startup Hypeman, the podcast. Carson, I want to just pause and sort of repeat back what you just said, because I think it's so important when we think about the larger context of things here. And it is that you said today's high school students who have FanFood at their football games are tomorrow's college students, are then the next year's professional fans, right? And that is truly embracing long game and understanding not just customer journey in terms of like a sales funnel, but customer lifetime journey. And this is well beyond like marketing metrics, but this is how you take actions to create a shift in the market's mindset overall. And it takes such long-term thinking, because like you said, like one mosquito bite doesn't matter. But a lot of mosquito bites, you have to do something, but it takes a while to get those mosquito bites in place. So can you just talk through like the patience of embracing the long game?
Yeah, patience or stress or anxiety. It's funny, like 5 years ago, because like mobile ordering inside venues, like early adopters failed at it, and it left a bad taste in the industry's mouth. This is how I perceived it when I started FanFood. Now the notion is it's not a matter of if, but when mobile ordering will be. So we are starting to see this shift. You hear the shift with press releases, and publications talk about it, the shift to go cashless, less and less people carry cash today. But you also see like trends from other industries that are, coming in to the sports space. So like the fact that like Starbucks now has nearly half of the revenue coming through that mobile ordering app.
Literally this morning, that's how I got my Starbucks.
Me too. Is a shift, right? The fact that like you have to get up out of your seat, go wait 20 minutes in line, miss a quarter. It's a terrible experience. And I think by focusing on constantly creating the best experience, user experience, constantly focusing on that, knowing what we do know. I'm a millennial. I don't like waiting in line. Love convenience. So it's coming.
Yeah.
Staying true to that, staying just persistent, and you start to see the shift. And there is definitely market timing. That's definitely a huge factor. You got to hit it. Sometimes it does require a little luck, but I mean, gotta hustle.
Right. You talked about like that poor fan experience when they do have to wait in line. So whether you know it or not, or whether anyone else knows it, I give probably every month between 1 and 5 startup pitch workshops at different incubators, accelerators, or just on my own to the Startup Hypeman audience. And I always use your example. I always give the FanFood elevator pitch example, but I also always tell everyone about that time when you were giving that pitch, the one you gave at the front of this podcast, to a room of people, and when that one guy like stood up and stopped you mid-sentence to talk about the Odell Beckham catch study. You remember that when that happened?
Yeah. And that became a big piece of I was like, your story is better than my story, and I'm gonna take your story to pitch to investors now because damn.
Yeah.
You missed the Odell Beckham catch.
And he was he was so elaborate about it, right?
Yeah, I would too.
He said, he was like, wait, no, that happened to me. He's like, I missed the greatest catch in NFL history. I paid $500
whatever
for my end zone seat. And then I was waiting in line. And that's when you've just struck a chord with people, right?
Yeah.
It's not just that you're not dancing around the issue. It's like you have gotten so emotionally in tune with a problem that they are telling back to you the exact moment in time it happened with real, in his case, anger, but with real power in their voice, real emotion in their voice.
Mm-hmm. And that's great, right? But our initial buyer is the venue, right? And so, yes, all fans share that same pain point, but it's pitching it to the venue. What's the pain point? The concessionaire doesn't, I mean, to some degree. I mean, yes, of course they care about providing a better fan experience. It's definitely part of the value proposition, but you have to be able to articulate why they need fan food just as much as why a fan needs fan food. Because you can't do the latter without the former first. Right. And so that's that's also, part of the challenge.
Well, and that's where, when we think about this idea of what does the bottom of the market need to hear versus the top of the market need to hear. I mean, when we spent the beginning of this year deep diving into that, when with the high schools, the athletic directors, the booster club presidents, if someone's thinking of fan food just from the outside, I guarantee they're not thinking of what is the mindset of a booster club president or an athletic director. They're thinking about pro stadiums for sure.
Yeah.
But, can you just kind of tease or talk through what the athletic director cares about or the booster club president cares about, and how does that differ from, say, what a major league or a professional venue person might care about?
Well, I think with the athletic director at a high school has a million responsibilities, right? And we know we thought they were the decision maker. They definitely can be the decision maker, but we also learned that they're putting out fires all of the time, right? And the last thing that they want to have to worry about is concessions, although sometimes that is another added responsibility. They just keep adding more and more responsibilities, but they delegate it to the president of the booster club, whose KPI is definitely driving fundraising initiatives. So yeah, we can go to them and say, hey, we have a fundraising platform that's going to help you, drive your biggest, concessions are their biggest fundraising driver for most high schools, and we're going to drive that. And what we also learned is this is cool piece of technology. These booster club parents have a lot of pride in the organization, and they want to be, and we heard this all the time, we want to be the talk of the town. We want to be the first to bring this really cool technology. And from a fan perspective, it doesn't really matter if you're a season ticket holder at a pro venue or you're a parent watching your son play under Friday Night Lights. No one likes waiting in lines and missing moments, period. Right. Yeah. And so the pain point from the fan perspective is still there. And so now when we're taking this technology, and it's great technology, into these high schools, it's really impactful to bring just as much, if not even more value there at that level and continuing to ride the wave up.
Got a couple more questions here before we wrap up. So like we've echoed several times throughout this conversation that the general expectation, if you were to hear about FanFood, is to just think professionals. I have to imagine that's what people who are applying, like you're at 25 employees now. So I have to imagine when people are applying for jobs at FanFood, like they're immediately like they're maybe coming into this interview being like, oh my God, you mean we could sell to the Raptors and sit courtside if they thank us? Yeah. Like all that stuff. So is it impacting the hiring process? And if so, like, how are you tempering that?
You set expectations, right? Like I'm really excited about you joining the team and I definitely want you to get there. Right.
Yeah.
But I want you to learn the business. I want you to become an expert. I want you to, learn how to set a meeting for close a few deals. Let's work together on that. And so the way I've kind of set it, with our initial sales team is like, that's where we want to get there, but let's prove it out first here. And then that's, the promotable potentially position in 6 months.
Yeah. Let's work on Wheaton Warrenville High School before the Washington Nationals.
Before you start sprinting.
Yeah. That's
I love the ambition. I honestly love it. Like people come to me like, oh, I'm going to go get this venue. And I'm like, I hope you do.
Yeah. But it's a good way to phrase it or position it to them as well. Because you're also as important as the today is with the bottom of the market. You're not saying, hey, the top of the market doesn't matter. It's just, we got to do this first before we get there. And then I think what it does is it buys people into the larger mission and knowing that today matters as a result of that.
Exactly. You couldn't have said it better.
So when you think about just, I guess, businesses at large, I mean, obviously the trade-off of bottom up here is a high school is going to generate significantly less revenue than Wrigley Field would, right? Like that's a given. So this really has to be a volume play in the bottom up strategy. When you think about business in general, what do you, I guess, see as, hey, it probably makes sense to consider what we've done, this bottom up approach? Like what market conditions do you think need to be in play for that to make the most sense?
That's tough. I mean, like we actually pivoted our business model because although the revenue opportunity from a volume perspective is significantly lower on a per event basis, the sheer number of potential customers is 100 times the amount. There's over 36,000 high schools in the United States, public high schools in the United States alone, right? And so the business model, and what we also learned, feedback, is that unlike a Grubhub, Postmates, or Uber Eats that take 20-30%, revenue share on product sales, they budget, every year. So it's like how we pivoted to more of a reoccurring revenue model and targeting the volume on the B2B side, with the expectation in the long run on the tail end, the transactional revenue will outweigh as more and more people continue to use FanFood as the preferred way of ordering. So as long as we kind of like have that foundation, we can build a profitable business. I think like other market, factors like a lot of these big tech companies going public, with like not sustainable business models also has forced me as an entrepreneur to kind of reprioritize, top line growth, revenue growth is important, but you also need to have a plan to create a profitable business. I think like that's just something that makes an entrepreneur kind of, it's like impressive. Like honestly, like if you can build like a profitable business and not have to rely on fundraising, that's definitely where we want to get to, right? And so we can do that by just kind of pivoting the model just a little bit.
Yeah. It warms my heart to hear you say that, building a profitable business, and that you've seen all these companies that just raise a crap ton and don't ever actually have a real business on their hands. And
that's the Midwest values right there.
Right. Well, okay. So then my last question before we begin our wrap up then, based off what you just said is, and this is something that I don't know if you've ever been asked before, or at least maybe not publicly, but I don't think it's really talked about. unless it's in like private circles, is when you and your executive team get together, do you have conversations around what will investors want to hear? Or do you have conversations around what's best for business? Or do you see them as the same thing?
I always do I obviously care, right? Like, obviously the investors are the ones that are making the decisions as to whether or not they want to invest in the company, but ultimately you have to do what's in the best interest of the business, right? Yeah. And so I think like investors, when the entrepreneur removes their ego, I think like investors like are most of the time aligned with what, ultimately you have to decide what's in the best interest of the business, but most of the time you're aligned. Should be, right? Because in what I do now too, especially with investors that say no, and you learn why. I mean, it's good practice because like, what about, FanFood is not investable, right?
Right.
Learn those things. Oh, it's because there's a certain revenue metric that you didn't hit, or the use, your month over month growth needs to be here or there, so they become benchmarks to some degree. So it's like, how do you hit those benchmarks? I like to think how what's the path of least resistance? How can you get to that milestone? To go back and convince investors to, put in more money.
Sure. All right. Where can our listeners learn more about FanFood, and where can they get in touch with you?
Yes, you can learn more about FanFood by going to our website, www.fanfoodapp.com. Subscribe, check out our blog there as well on our website. You can find me, hit me up on LinkedIn, Carson Goodale. My email is carson@fanfoodapp.com. If you want to shoot me a note, great to connect.
And you mentioned FanFood has a podcast now. State the name, and is it on all the platforms?
Yes, check it out. It's the Game Day Playbook. It's hosted by Rob Cressy, the sports guru himself. It's on all of the applicable podcast channels. I'm a big Spotify guy, so I've been liking that a lot. So yeah, I would encourage everyone to check that out.
I keep pushing people to Spotify for this show, and like, cause we got on Spotify in that like first batch of podcasts that got on like early last year. And I'm always so surprised when the listenership is like 95% Apple, 5. I'm like, everyone listens to Spotify for everything else. How are they just listening to podcasts through Apple? Maybe they just don't know yet Spotify has podcasts.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
That'll probably change.
I would imagine, especially because Spotify's upping it. They're doing like original podcasts now and all that stuff. So, All right. So top line takeaways from today's conversation. Our topic was bottom up customer acquisition. So this is where we'll just each give our 1 or 2 big lessons learned or takeaways for the audience. To me, when I think about bottom up customer acquisition, it's really about how do you push yourself into market to where you can no longer be avoided. And that's what I see as kind of what is unfolding for you guys right now. What kind of top line takeaway or lesson do you have for the audience?
Do what's in the best interest of the business, and don't let your pride get ahead of that, right? Because I think from like our perspective, like, of course we want to go and partner with the Cubs, and of course we want to partner with the Bulls and the Bears, but be smart, because especially in the early days, you have like the entrepreneur, it has a finite amount of resources, right? And so you have to make a business decision. What's the biggest bang you can get for your buck within that, finite amount of resources you have in order to get to that next. If you want to get here one day, do what you need to do today to put yourself in that best position tomorrow. And that's my biggest takeaway.
My final question, which is what we asked every guest on the show now, fill in the blank. Entrepreneurship is blank.
Gangsta.
All right, explain. You got to explain that a little bit more. I love it. You don't have to think.
I don't know. I just like spit something out. Entrepreneurship is blank. It's not glamorous, and it's not always the most fun. It's a lot of responsibility, but definitely the most fun and rewarding, impactful job that I've been a part of. And now that we have a team too, it's so exciting and equally as intimidating that, we now have a team, and everyone's pretty much smarter than me now. So it's also super cool to see smart people, working together as a team that's, striving toward one goal or one accomplishment. And that's just been probably the most rewarding thing.
Yeah. Right on. Probably a little less lonely too.
Gangsta. Yeah.
It's gangsta, but it's also not glamorous, and it's a lot of responsibility. He is Carson Goodale. He is the CEO of FanFood. Carson, thank you so much for joining us today for this edition of Startup Hypeman, the podcast.
Thanks, Raj. Nice chatting with you.
That concludes this week's episode. Thank you so much for listening. If you liked what you heard, you can share this episode with a friend, or you can leave a rating and review on the Apple Podcasts page. When you do that, it boosts us in the search results, and ultimately that means more entrepreneurs will listen, which means we share the message, we spread the mission, and support more entrepreneurs at the end of the day. You don't have to stop with the podcast if you want more, and if you are interested in telling your company's story better across your demo calls to investors and to any audience you seek, well then why not have a conversation with me? Head to startuphypeman.com, fill out a form there, and let's talk. If you've got recommendations for future guests for the show, or you want to be a guest on the show yourself, email media@startuphypeman.com. That'll tie a bow on this one. Thank you again to this week's guest for joining. I am Raj Nation. You have been listening to Startup Hype Man, the podcast. We will see you next time. Hype Man out, word up, raise up.
Got you howling at the moon. Yeah. This a dance with the devil, girl. Steady sundown too. Yeah. This a dance with the devil, girl. Tell me what you gonna do. This a dance with the devil, girl. And if you can't get it loose, then fall into the truth. It got you howling at the moon. Yeah. This a dance with the devil, girl. Steady sundown. Yeah. This a dance with the devil, girl. Tell me what you gonna do. This a dance with the devil, girl. And if you can't get it loose, then it's a dance with the devil.